Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Fuller. I'm the president of the Southport Historical Society, and I'm really glad you all are here today, especially with the weather. I'm going to introduce Chief Drew. He's a man who needs no introduction, especially for all of you, but I do want to say he's one of the most popular and respected men in our community. He holds the position of fire chief for our city. He's the third generation of his family to be in Southport Fire, and his son, Madison, is currently the fire marshal and the fourth generation in Southport Fire. Charles Drew is also the pastor of Lighthouse Pentecostal Church in Winnebago, North Carolina. He's very passionate about the community and helping others. In addition to the fire department and the church, he's involved in countless community efforts and groups to help those in need. So thank you very much, and thank you for coming today.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you, Liz, for inviting me, and we appreciate everything that the Southport Historical Society does for our community, keeping us informed of things in the past, because that's one thing for certain that we know of. We cannot forget the past. If we do, we're going to be in bad shape in our future. I've come today to talk to you about the beginnings of the Southport Fire Department and do a little history talk about several different things with the department. One quick question that I wanted to ask before I got started is, does anybody know the oldest fire department in North Carolina? Anybody? Any of my firemen that are here want to venture and nope, it's not Bath. I was shocked. I just found out last night. Actually, it's Newbern. Newbern Fire Department is the oldest. Now, this is an easier question, and I'm sure that some of you, especially your firemen, are going to know this. Who was America's first volunteer fire chief? Okay, Bob. Benjamin Franklin, 1736, first volunteer fire chief of the Union Fire Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So you know that Mr. Franklin is the father of the fire service. So we give respect to him, and we always honor him. And last year at our firemen's competition, we had a Benjamin Franklin impersonator that came and read the first letter from one of his meetings in the Union Fire Company. But we're here today to talk about Southport. In the beginning of the Southport Fire Department, every organization has a genesis. Every organization has a beginning. The history of firefighting in America can be traced back to our early settlers. There's evidence of a Spanish explorer that entered the Charles River. Wasn't named after me, but this river that runs right out here in front of Southport was originally called the Charles River, later called the Cape Fear River. Around 1520, Spanish explorers met with Aborigines right here in Southport. By 1792, Smithville had been founded, and the first 100 lots were laid out in our town. It didn't take long for fire to begin taking its toll on the new settlers. Being recorded from 1792 as Smithville was founded, there were fires from 1792 all the way through the 1800s. But there was never an organized fire department in Smithville or Southport until 1893. That's when the first organized fire department was formed. So I have people ask me all the time, well, who was fighting fire? Well, I look back thanks to Mr. Bill Reeves, who has got a chronological order of Southport from back in the 1500s, and thanks to the Historical Society for preserving this information. A lot of the firefighting that was done in Smithville or Southport prior to an organized fire department was done by the soldiers at Fort Johnston at the garrison. There are some recorded fires where they came over from across the river from Fort Caswell and fought fires in Smithville as well. So one of the first recorded fires in Smithville took place on February 24th, 1868. The residence of Joseph Benzel in Smithfield was destroyed by fire. Mr. Benzel was away tending to his duties as a pilot. He was a river pilot, and his family were all asleep in the house when the fire broke out on the kitchen roof. Nothing was saved that night except for the clothes that was on the family's back. That's the only thing that they could save. The residence was a spacious structure constructed in 1867 at a cost of $8,000 and was very elaborately furnished. A package of money, about $1,500, was also destroyed. By this disastrous fire, the second, which has occurred to Mr. Benzel since the war, he has lost nearly all of the wealth accumulated by years of perilous toil, and it's thrown back upon his physical resources just as the frost of age began to bear heavily upon him. So that's a little description of one of the first fires recorded. And like I said, there wasn't a fire department organized yet in 1868, so very likely that fire was fought by soldiers at Fort Johnston. So then we come up to January 15th, 1869, when we have another fire, a terrible fire started in Smithfield. The bells, I want you to pay close attention to this fact because there wasn't a fire alarm system in the city yet. The bells of the vessels in the harbor rang the alarm. So prior to us having the bell that was purchased in 1916, that you can see in this picture at the original fire station on Nash Street, and we have this bell at fire headquarters. That bell was purchased by the city of Southport in 1916. When they would have an emergency in town, what the norm back then was for them to ring bells in the harbor. So ships, any other type bells, they would start ringing. So a terrible fire struck January 15th, 1869. The bells of the vessels in the harbor rang the alarm, and troops from the garrison and sailors from the vessels aided the citizens in their fight to subdue the flames. The fire began in the kitchen of Dr. S.D. Thurston, who lived in a rented double-tenant house belonging to Miss E.A. Everett. It soon spread to the residence, which was destroyed. The fire then spread to the residence and the store of Mark Reynolds. Listen to this fact. An old man of 68 years old, which that almost hurts my feelings because I'm starting to get close to that 60 mark, and I don't feel like that's old, who lost everything and too feeble to begin over again. The flames then jumped to the store of Mr. E. Legg and Mr. Shoup, also owned by Miss Everett. The fire spread to the store owned by John Brown and occupied the Priolet and Company, and then proceeded across the street to the dwelling of Miss Lockwood, occupied by Miss Ellis, thence to the residence of Philip Priolet, a very fine residence, and it was totally destroyed. So this is a major fire. I mean, it's going from house to house, business to business in the town. The residence of Dr. W.G. Curtis, a duplicate of Mr. Priolet, caught fire next, and the fire burned fiercer than ever, burning the garrison fence nearby. So we know that this was in the vicinity of Fort Johnston because the garrison fence was referred to here. Citizens were busy covering neighborhood buildings with wet blankets and buckets of water. So they had a bucket brigade that they set up to try to fight the fire. The excitement was intense. The fire began at 4:30 a.m. and about 10 a.m. the fire had ceased. So this fire burned 5.5 hours from house to house and business to business in the downtown district. After it was over, 5 dwellings and 3 stores were totally destroyed. During the fire, Miss Stewart and the wife of Captain Piper found some looting going on and chased the culprits away. A sailor from the revenue cutter reported that he saw some persons under Dr. Thurston's kitchen with a light. And in 30 minutes, the fire broke out. So very likely this fire was one of the first arson fires in the city of Smithfield. The acts of the incendiary were suspected earlier. A citizen of Smithville later wrote, "God grant we may soon receive security for property in small villages." Well, that was a bad fire on January 15th. Well, 5 days later, another fire broke out in Smithville. And it sounds to me like they had a little firebug or an arsonist running around. Fire struck again on January 20th, just 5 days later, in Smithville. The saloon of Raymond Sellers and the boathouse of Mr. Lehue and Mr. Daniel were both destroyed by fire. Captain W.J. Potter lost a boat, and Simon Grissom lost a pilot boat, both next to a boathouse that was on fire. Philip Prylo lost a number of new doors, an amount of salt, and a fish seine, which he had left at the boathouse, and arson was suspected once again. So, with this being said, you realize as time goes on, time evolves, there's going to be a need for a fire department. When you're having situations like this, arson, fires, kitchen fires, we're going to need an organized fire department, because we're not going to always be able to depend on sailors being in the harbor, on people coming from Fort Caswell, or soldiers from Fort Johnston, which sometimes was scarcely manned, according to historical documents. On March the 6th, 1885, the daughter of Captain W.J. Potter, who was visiting with her grandfather, which I thought was very ironic, Mr. William Drew, who must have been a descendant of mine, had her clothes catch on fire, and she was critically burned. An additional devastating fire on April the 16th, 1885, where the residence of a Miss Lewis was destroyed by fire. She was rescued from the structure by a gentleman grabbing a ladder at a nearby business. He rescued her from the second story of the structure, and his name was Jeff Piver. One of the first heroic acts that's recorded, without it being a war or something like that, or a fight, but of course, because of fire, one of the first heroic acts was done by Mr. Jeff Piver. So after all of these events in the late 1800s, it was very evident that fire protection was a necessary element in the newly named city of Southport, because it wasn't very long after Smithville, of course, became Southport. The city grew and began to take shape. More structures were added. The downtown began to be developed. Wooden homes with chimneys and kitchens with wood stoves multiplied at a very fast pace. Soon the city faced a number of issues, including water supply, equipment, and the danger of fire. So we roll ahead a few years, and we could talk about some other fires. Matter of fact, I'm going to reference this one, February 6, 1872. A fire destroyed 2 houses on Water Street owned by Dr. Frank, one leased to 2 ladies, and the other occupied by Dr. Frank himself. The fire next spread to the residence of C.C. Morse, and the kitchen of Dr. W.J. Curtis was destroyed. And I thought this was very interesting. The historical record says the dwelling of Dr. Curtis barely escaped destruction, and he is stated as saying, "We hope it may convince the city fathers of necessity of having at least one good fire engine in the city." So as far back as 1872, there's a record of a doctor in Southport saying, "Hey, we need a fire engine here. We need some type of fire protection, because this is not a good situation." So we come right up to 1893, January 21st, 1893. There were city meetings going on. Mayor, Board of Aldermen, 11 o'clock this morning, there's going to be a city meeting going on. And guess what they're going to be doing? They're going to be discussing the budget for 2024. Well, January 21st, 1893, the mayor, Mr. R.M. Westcott of Southport, was discussing city business, and the fire department was on the agenda in 1893. He discussed purchasing a hook and ladder cart from the Wilmington Fire Department that was used. This is the first piece of fire equipment that was purchased for the city of Southport. January 21st, 1893, they purchased a hose cart, a hook and ladder cart that would carry some ladders, some buckets, some hose that would be able to be utilized in fighting fires in the city. Now, I've been told it's very ironic that even when I joined the fire department, Mr. Hubbard, who was the chief of the fire department, actually was still living, and I actually have memory of talking to Mr. Hubbard, going to visit him with my grandfather, who was assistant chief. Well, the ironic thing about Chief Hubbard is he joined the fire department in 1920. So very likely, Mr. Hubbard, who became the fire chief in like the 1930s, served with men that were originally on the fire department in 1893. So talking with Mr. Hubbard, we did get a little bit of information that there was a stable that was built near Franklin Square Park in the vicinity that this building was built. And a horse stayed in the back of the stable in Franklin Square Park. And when they purchased this hook and ladder cart from the Wilmington Fire Department, it was stored in the stable. And when the horse would begin to hear the bells ring in Southport, it would let itself out of the stable and back up to the horse cart to be ready when the firefighters got there to pull the cart to fight fire. So I thought that was a very interesting story that I remember Chief Hubbard telling about for what had been passed down to him from some of the original firefighters that formed the fire department. So January 21st, 1893, Mayor Westcott made recommendation to purchase this hook and ladder cart from Wilmington Fire Department. It would be stored in the stable of A.J. Robbins. Now, that name probably rings a bell to a lot of the Historical Society members. Mr. A.J. Robbins is the one that built the old courthouse on Moore Street, and his name is also on several other buildings in the city limits of Southport still today. So it was stored in the stable of Mr. A.J. Robbins near the foot of Boundary Street. A volunteer fire company was organized on February 3rd, 1893, with 20 men. The officers included Mr. T.M. Morse, who was the first chief of the Southport Fire Department. Mr. J.A. Penner was the first assistant foreman. Mr. H. Daniel was the second assistant foreman of the department. By February 15th, 1915, many commercial buildings in Southport were destroyed by fire once again. Soldiers from Fort Caswell came over quickly to assist in fighting the fire, and the fire department also responded. Bucket Brigade saved many other businesses, buildings, and private residences. November the 22nd, 1915, a meeting was held to obtain more volunteers for the fire department. 20 men joined, and 1 week later, Mr. Ernest Burris was named fire chief of the fire department. A committee was appointed to draw up bylaws. Soon, one of the leading social events, I thought this was very, very ironic as well. One of the leading social events in Southport was the Friday afternoon fire drill. They would get out and they would practice, and everybody, one historical record by Bill Reeves says, everybody in town gathered to watch the firemen do their fire drill. The volunteer firemen were organized into 3 companies, and there was friendly rivalry between them in their drills that attracted the whole entire town to come out and watch them practice fighting fire. So we move right along. January 21st, 1916, new officers were elected in the fire department. A constitution and bylaws were officially adopted. The city purchased 3 hose reels, 1,500 feet of fire hose, several fire extinguishers, and other necessary equipment. By July 29th, 1916, Southport was prepared for firefighting operations with newly installed water mains and hydrants. It's been within the last 3 or 4 years that those original fire hydrants, which one of them was at the corner of West and Lord Street, and there were quite a few original hydrants that were still on Lord and in the West Street area, that they just pulled those original fire hydrants up. And I believe, don't we have one somewhere that's stored, or Todd has one? Todd, I think, has one of the original fire hydrants that was established in 1916. But July 29th, 1916, those newly water mains, fire hydrants, and the purchase of this fire alarm bell was done in 1916. And we're very proud to still have that original fire bell that is at fire headquarters today. May the 18th, 1917, the Reverend T.G. Vickers was the president of the Southport Volunteer Fire Department. T.G. Vickers was also the pastor at the Trinity United Methodist Church. So he was pastor of the church and chief of the fire department. So when I became the chief of the fire department, somebody told me, they said, "Oh, you're the first pastor to ever be the fire chief." I said, "No. Mr. T.G. Vickers with the United Methodist Church was the first pastor that was the chief of the fire department all the way back in 1917. So none of the firemen were paid a salary, but they were all given a poll tax exemption in 1917. The chief was paid $5 for every fire that happened in Southport in 1917. So, with all of that being said, there's been a lot of evolution that's taken place from those time periods till now. And I want to talk a little bit, and I'll close out and answer some questions. So we've had evolution of the fire cart, the horse-drawn cart that first came in Southport, to the first fire engine that was purchased in 1922. We've had the evolution of the fire alarm system. Prior to this bell being purchased, you heard me say they would ring bells in the harbors, they would ring bells on boats and ships. This bell was purchased in 1916, and then the evolution of the fire alarm system went from the bell. When the second station was built beside this, a 3-bay station that was a brick building, they installed a siren above the fire station. That siren would be rung anytime there was an emergency in town. Now, my grandfather, as a child, who was the assistant chief on the fire department, when this bell would be rung prior to the siren, he lived on Atlantic Avenue in about the 600 block of Atlantic Avenue growing up. They lived the 400 block of West Street, then they lived in the 600 block of Atlantic Avenue. He said you could hear that bell all over town. When there was an emergency, people would go down there and they would just start ringing that bell, and the firemen knew to report to the fire station. But that system evolved from the early 1900s to where a siren was installed in the 40s and the 1950s. That was very prevalent, and they would use that siren to alert the firefighters that there was an emergency. In the 1950s and the 1960s, there was a telephone system that was used in Southport, where if you had an emergency, you dialed a certain number and it would ring at a firefighter's house. It started at the chief's house, and then it would ring on down through and go to each other person in the fire department that had a phone. It was like a party line type deal, and that's how they were notified that there was a fire. Until the 1970s and 1980s, when we got pagers. They did not look like this. I should have brought one of the original pagers. We still have one at fire headquarters, but the firefighters carried pagers, and that's how they were alerted. So there was an evolution of the fire alarm system in Southport. Same thing with the building. The first building was a stable on Boundary Street, horse kept in Franklin Square Park. The original fire station location, this building was exactly where the public restrooms are on Nash Street today. That's where this building was located. I do not know who lived in this house. I've been asked that before. That house was either moved or torn down. But at one point, the fire department was downstairs and the city hall was upstairs in this building. So that building served from the early 1900s to about 1940 as the fire department. 1945 to 1950, the second building was built. The 3-bay brick building was built right to the side of this building, and that building was used for almost 60 years until we moved out of that building in 2010 to fire headquarters, where we're at currently. So let me give you a little bit of brief information about the Model T, and then we'll try to wrap everything up and we'll try to close everything out. Southport Fire Department, with a long record of service and tradition to this community, has an iconic centerpiece of history sitting in a glass case at the corner of our headquarters property today. It's actually the first motorized fire truck that ever rolled on the streets of Brunswick County. It sparks pride, imagination, and interest to firefighters and citizens alike. People from all over the world, when they're in Southport, they come to see that fire truck that is actually 102 years old now. 1922 Model T, Ford Model T fire truck. That truck was brought in by the railroad in Southport, the WB&S Railroad that came in, and it was offloaded on Rhett Street. It was an exciting event for the Brunswick County seat at that time and its organized fire department. It replaced the 1916 model hand-drawn hose cart that had been purchased for fire operations from the Wilmington Fire Department. This truck replaced that. Back when the city limits stretched north only as far as Owen Street, where the city gate was, which kept horses and pigs from wandering into the woods. That's been a long time ago, but the truck had no pump, but it was equipped with 2 tanks that could discharge about 50 gallons of water using a soda acid reaction in those tanks. The truck carried several smaller soda acid fire extinguishers, as well as hoses that connected to the municipal water system. It was good for chimney fires and small cooking fires, which were pretty common back in that day. My grandfather told me stories. The truck has always been cantankerous about starting. And he said when they were fighting fires, there were a lot of times the firemen had to push this truck to the fire instead of riding to the fire. And then after the water would be used out of the 2 tanks, a lot of times if they could get the fire going, once the water was used, they would just ride around the block and blow the siren while the fire was burning. My granddad grew up in Southport. Remember, the truck was in service prior to him joining the department in the early 1950s. The 1922 Model T engine, very straightforward. It's 2.9 liters, straight 4-cylinder motor, produces 20 horsepower, and has a top speed of just below 40 miles per hour. An electric starter and battery have been added to the truck, 2 of the 3 non-original parts of the vehicle. The other non-original part is a light that's on the truck that spins that was not originally on the truck. Driving the truck is not nearly as simple as tinkering with its mechanics. The late Captain Dickie Marlowe was the official mechanic and driver of this truck for 40 years or better. Before Marlowe's death, he taught another firefighter how to run the truck, which is now used only during parades, funeral services for fallen comrades, and special events. Chief Treadway is here, and he is the driver of the truck now. 3 separate foot pedals control the 1 reverse and 2 forward gears. The accelerator and a tricky spark advance lever are both on the steering column. It takes practice and technique to efficiently drive the apparatus. There are stories that women of Southport learned to drive utilizing the Model T during World War II. When the men were fighting the war, women learned to drive on this truck. And I have a picture somewhere of 2 or 3 women sitting on the truck, one in the driver's seat. And I'm thinking it came from that time period. The Model T stayed in service until at least 1948. Back when Captain Dickie Marlowe's father, Ed Marlowe, was the fire chief. Firefighter Dan Harrelson, that owned a local grocery store, traded the city of Southport a set of tires for the Model T in the 1950s, and he kept it at the old Robin's Nest. He later donated it back to the city with the original title never being registered to anyone but the city of Southport. So, firefighters of years gone by utilized the tattered truck for about 3 decades for special events after it was out of service. The truck was rusted, it was worn, it was nearly dilapidated. In the mid-1980s, Fire Chief Greg Cumby and Assistant Chief Billy Drew led an effort to fully restore the antique truck. Firefighters rallied with Chief Cumby and Chief Drew and sold nearly 2,000 pounds of barbecue in 2 days, raising nearly $30,000 in the town. With other fundraising monies, the truck was restored to a better than new appearance. Chief Billy Drew said, "The truck is part of our heritage. It's part of me, and it's part of Southport." He said, "We wanted it to be a symbol of the dedication of our department and the city of Southport." It took Creason Motors of Charlotte about 9 months to restore the truck, which has 95% of its original parts. The truck was brought back to Southport fully restored just in time for the 4th of July parade in 1991. Retired Chief Cumby said a Ford Motor Company representative told him that there were only 3 known fire trucks of that type still in running condition. One is at the J.K. Lilly Automobile Museum in Sandwich, Massachusetts. So the truck today is 102 years old, and we're very proud to still have it in very good working order for the city. So with all of that being said, I'll close with this. The fire department was housed in a 1-bay wood frame building for almost 40 years. Then a 3-bay brick structure was built next to the original fire station that lasted for more than 50 years. And today, we are in fire headquarters. We moved into that building in 2010. A relocation of fire headquarters was done because the city has grown and it needed to be more centrally located. So after we purchased the land on North Howe Street and the construction of a state-of-the-art building with 4 drive-through bays, we're looking for that building to last us 75 to 100 years and continue to serve the citizens of Southport. As we move forward into the future, the officers and members are very proud that the Southport Fire Department this year, I believe, will be 131 years old of an organized fire department in Southport. So with that being said, that's my presentation. I hope I didn't bore you. And I will entertain any questions or comments or anything that you have to add. And maybe some of the firemen might have something to add that I missed today. Yes, ma'am.
Have you gotten a salary increase since the original tweet?
Just a slight salary increase. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We actually stayed a full volunteer fire department until 2015. So we were fully volunteer until 2015. In 2015, the Board of Aldermen appointed me as the first paid fire chief. And I was the only paid person for a while, and then we merged with the Southport Rescue Squad, and they let me hire somebody to oversee rescue operations. And then after that, then we started building our combination department. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we have 17 full-time staff members. And we still have a roster of about 50 or 60 volunteers.
Was the response area the same outside of Caswell, but was the response area like back in the 50s and 60s the same amount that we covered now?
Actually, there was a time when Southport Fire Department was the only fire department in this county. So I've been told that fire truck would respond to calls as far away as Charlotte. Wow. At one point in time. So I really don't know who the second fire department in the county was. I need Charlotte. Charlotte may have been the second fire department to organize in the county. That'd be interesting to go back and see. I mean, like Boiling Spring Lakes Fire Department is only since the 1970s. Yopon and Oak Island, I think maybe the 60s or 70s when they organized. So Southport is the first and oldest fire department in the county.
So what's your first due now?
Our first due out of the fire station. We have an engine.
No, I mean, what's the location? What's the?
Oh, the fire district.
Yeah.
Okay, so our fire district goes all the way on 87 and 133 to Boiling Spring Lakes. We go on 211 all the way to St. James. And then on Long Beach Road, we cover almost all of Long Beach Road with the exception of a few parcels that are in the city limits of Oak Island. We go across the bridge and we have a contract that we signed with the town of Caswell, so we cover the town of Caswell as well. So currently, we have fire headquarters. We have a downtown substation that was the old rescue squad building that we have some apparatus in. We have a station on Long Beach Road, and then we have a station at Caswell Beach. So we have 4 stations.
Busy fire department.
Yes, actually, we're with EMS and fire calls. We're running well over 3,000 calls a year now. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Chief, I know you obviously you grew up here. As a young child, did you go to meet Santa Claus on the?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was one of the thrills of being a kid in Southport, was that Southport Fire Department has a tradition of always bringing Santa Claus to town in December. We have a picture at the station that's dated back to the 1940s with the second fire truck, not this truck, but the truck that was purchased. It was a 1949 Ford, was the second fire truck that Southport had. And we have a picture with Santa Claus on the back of that when it came into town. And but yes, that was a tradition that is almost 100 years old, of the fire department bringing Santa Claus to town. And as a kid, that's one of my fondest memories, of going to the fire station with my granddad and riding the trucks, because we let all the kids ride the trucks during that time of bringing Santa Claus to town.
So it sounds like for you, riding the trucks was more important than meeting Santa Claus.
And that is the truth.
It's a little risky, isn't it?
That is the truth. And even today, we even see some of the kids come to the station to ride the trucks, but they don't stand in line to see Santa Claus. You know, so it's a great tradition. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering who decides when to bring other fire departments in for larger fires? Or how does that communication?
Well, the incident commander, whoever's commanding the scene, would make that decision. Now, if it's a structural fire, if there's a house fire or a building on fire, we have what we call automatic mutual aid. So anytime we have a structure that is on fire in Southport or in our district, they automatically page Sunny Point Fire Department. Sunny Point has had a fire department since 1954. They may have been the second fire department in the county, but it's a federal fire department. And we've had a mutual aid agreement with them since 1954. So they automatically respond. And then we have Oak Island set up to automatically come to us as well. Backed up by St. James or Boiling Springs would be next in line to come. Other questions?
When did Smithville switch into Southport?
Ooh,
Smithville was out 1887.
1887. I knew it was in the 1880s, but I didn't know exactly when. So,
Is there a particular meaning behind why did they change the name? Was there a certain reason?
They were trying to bring a railroad into town, and they didn't think simply they didn't think Smithville was fancy enough name. So Southport, because they wanted to be the port of the South.
right. They wanted, yeah. And originally, before it was even called Smithville, it was called Clarendon. Is that correct?
Called what?
Clarendon.
Claire, oh.
But I don't know.
Yes, I've read that last night in Bill Reeves' information. I didn't realize that, but the area was just called Clarendon.